Good evening, everyone. I think we're ready to get started. So, our speaker today is Alfonso Medina. Alfonso established T38 Studio in 2009. It's a firm that combines development, architectural design, construction, and urban planning. The firm works on a wide range of projects, however, mostly focusing on residential projects and collaborations with artists and art institutions. Many of the firm's work is built in Tijuana, Mexico, situated on the border between the United States and Mexico. After establishing his practice, Alfonso went on to graduate from the Southern California Institute of Architecture, or SCI-Arc, in 2011. He has since been an assistant professor at SCI-Arc and has been invited to critique at the AA, UCLA, SCI-Arc, and New School in San Diego. He has also taught as a visiting professor at the École Spéciale d'Architecture in Paris. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Alfonso Medina.
Thank you so much, Shiva. It's great to be here. I was here almost a year ago, right? For an AIA student small lecture series. I'm really happy to be back. This is actually our team. Our team is not mainly composed by architects, but by construction workers, by carpenters, masons, plumbers, electricians. Every architecture project, through its inception to the construction, always takes a huge amount of energy and people involved for it to happen. And what we have the advantage that most of the team that's involved in every one of our projects is always the same team. So basically, our architecture practice is about 15 people, and our construction practice, the team is around 100 people. But most of them have always been part of this team. We've been working together for almost 10 years. I'm just gonna tell you guys the story of basically how it started. And that was my first architecture office, this right here. Honestly, there was no better way to learn about architecture. I was studying in Monterrey, in Mexico, and I had the opportunity when I was around halfway through undergrad to build two houses. So I was studying in Monterrey, which is close to the border with Texas, and I had the opportunity to go to Tijuana to build these two houses. So I dropped out of school, went there, had probably like 10 plans to do two houses, and just got on site, got construction people together and started. So I spent every day like 8 or 10 hours at the site, just learning how you put everything together. And from this small team that started, it's just been growing and adapting. And I mean, I was just talking about Shiva that my career or the practices trajectory has never been really planned. Everything has just been growing very organic, like even our office. Once we had like other architects, this was the first one, we just built something around it. And we were just always spending time on site, learning how things were done and how things were put together. And the team just kept growing. And I mean, it's been an amazing experience because most of my time is not really spent in a desk or drawing AutoCAD, but with these guys and solving problems and designing on site. And most of what I know, I've learned from them. So basically, going back a little bit, I really enjoy Deus Wood's work. I found this, that he said that the biggest problem you can have in life is not having a problem. So for us to be able to practice in a context like Tijuana, which most of you have probably heard of, probably because of all of the bad things that have happened there, is an amazing opportunity. It's almost like a blank slate to be able to work there. So I started doing a couple of houses, and I was just thinking about architecture as a building, as a house, as space, not really thinking about the relationship between architecture and the city until I went to SIRE to start my master's in urbanism. And then when we had the opportunity to select the topic of our thesis, we selected to go to Chile. About 2 or 3 months after that huge earthquake that mostly hit the southern part of Chile, Concepcion. And this is a picture of when we went there. And just to start to understand architecture as a tool, right? I mean, it's not just about creating space, but it's about how that space that you're creating, or how every small input that you have on the city really affects the context. So that's the moment when my understanding of architecture kind of like shifted a little bit more from doing houses or doing small buildings to doing really components of the city. To see how after one dramatic event and being able to understand like that stage of a city in which it's in a post-traumatic stage, how society and how its residents react to it. So coming back to Tijuana, I started doing my first projects in 2008, which were like those years that it was crazy. Like it was being inside of a war zone. You'd be driving down the street and people would be like shooting each other, like completely crazy. But I grew up there. So I kind of like, it's not that it becomes part of daily life. And people are like, they don't have a choice. They just go on with their lives and try to shift and adapt to the conditions of the city. So that's when we started to try to use architecture as a tool to create better quality of life for the residents of a city. And Tijuana, as you know, is the border with the States, with San Diego, has had a dramatic increase in size through the decades. It was growing at one point almost 7 acres a day, which is something that's almost unthinkable because those 7 acres a day that it was growing were completely unplanned. So people would just come by and start building their own houses. It was all informal settlements. And the government couldn't keep up. They would just like, people would start living there, and after a while services would come. So just the way that the city was planned and the complexity in which it was growing was completely unmanageable. It's impressive when you're flying there. You can read the border being 20,000 feet in the sky, just because on one side it's green, and on the other side it's all like brown and dirt. So it's about how you start reading the city. The city was developed almost, I think 49% of it was informally developed. So you have these two types of developments, the formal developments and the informal developments. And what happened is that the informal developments, through time, became formal. They became established. Tijuana was kind of like the backyard where San Diego or part of the States would just send whatever they didn't need. So it's kind of like the most sustainable development you could ever think of, right? I mean, this is way better than LEED. This is recycling garage doors, recycling windows. I mean, most of the walls in these houses this is a garage door, there's another garage door there. It's like completely sustainable, LEED Platinum. So we just started doing research, trying to understand how the city had developed. You can see there all the components, and they stay the color that it's almost like going back and researching the history of a single panel. And that component, where was it? Where did it come from? And then you have what was formal, which were these construction companies doing 15,000 houses, 20,000 houses, but they were doing them and building them in the desert, 2 hours away from any job source. So what happened is that people moved into them. They could buy them with like $10, and then you would get a mortgage. So everybody started buying these houses, and then 1 year or a couple of months after living in them, they couldn't pay for the transportation to get there because the houses were 2 hours away. So half of their income was spent on just getting there. So a year, 2 years, 3 years after, they were all abandoned. So now you have these ghost cities in the middle of the desert. It's almost like you don't even know if this is Marfa and it's a Donald Judd piece, or if, well, I mean, it's amazing, like just the way that these houses were developed. So we spent a lot of time researching and trying to understand those formal components and those informal components, and what was the right path or the right way to do architecture in that context. And the context that we were working in was this. After all of the insecurity and the violence and all the conditions that this post-traumatic city had, people were just building walls. I mean, they weren't doing any architecture or any residential. It's just like doing walls, doing barbed wire fences, doing whatever they could to basically, in their mind, protect themselves. And most architecture wasn't even being designed by architects. It was just being done by people that did construction. You would get this super weird pastiches of like, there's this certain idea that in Mexico, or at least in Tijuana, that whatever is being done in San Diego is way better than what's being done in Mexico. So there would be this super weird mixes of California style architecture with like whatever they thought was fancy Palladium style houses. So this is basically when we started thinking about architecture as a tool to develop quality of life, to see how we could use development and how we could use this housing projects that we're doing as actual components of the city, and how their impact would spread through a certain context. And this is the work that we were doing. So basically, for example, in this area here, we did 5 single-family homes. This were 12, now we're doing the 15th. Here we did 6, these are 18, and those are 4. And that's, I mean, basically here, these were my first projects, and they just started as a single house that then became 2, that then became 4, and we just kept going. That team kept growing, and I wasn't really planning anything. I didn't have any financial expertise. It was just like, you do something, you learn from it, you see the impact that it has. I mean, I was dealing directly with each one of the clients. So I was like building the house, and then I would hand in the keys to the person that would live there. And there was this relationships that were being established with the inhabitants, and you could, through time, understand the impact of what you were doing in people's lives, like kids growing up there, the relationship between one neighbor to the other. So really, our architecture was being developed not by theory, but by how people were inhabiting these spaces, by the relationship between one house to the next. And in every project, we're trying to impact the city in a positive way. It's not just about doing a beautiful building or doing something that's aesthetically interesting. It's about really taking a risk and trying to do something for the city. This was one of the first, I mean, for me, larger scale projects that we did. And it was the context of really high-end houses in Tijuana. And all of these houses were 500 to 1,500 square meters of construction. This is all one house, and that small project that we did is 4. But what happened is that it became unsustainable. Like in that greenhouse, there's just like one single old lady living there that cannot even maintain the house because it's too expensive, it's too big. But the city is not really planning, oh, like we should do a label over on the zoning, we should have more density. Things just kind of like stay. So we did it the Mexican way. Sometimes they say it's better to say you're sorry than ask for permission. So we really tried to push a change of density. And we worked together with the city and started promoting and doing this project. And we got to build 4 units instead of 1. So, I mean, our idea and our objective was that people that actually grew up in the area, younger people, could stay and live there. So you needed to build smaller units, you needed more density, you needed to do the city more efficiently. And that's basically what we did. Our aim was that this project would be something that we didn't have to continue building these projects, but other architects or other developers could just follow a certain formula and keep doing them. And I think like 6 months after we got this project finished, another guy started building a 30-floor tower really close, and they just canceled every permit to do multi-family unit projects. Gonna go by. So basically, it's just about understanding. We became very practical in a sense of what we need to understand to put together this project and really be able to develop them. And the way that we work is really designing modules. And we have certain modules that we know that already work. They're 80 square meters, 100, 120 square meters. And in every project, we're just basically composing them in different ways. It's not that we're changing and the bathrooms are always different. We're really more focused on the relationship between these modules and these components to the city than in trying to change a kitchen or a bathroom or something like that. And we're very creative. I mean, this is where we learned how to do our projects, just by seeing and analyzing the way that things are put together and how they're built. That's actually the terrace for our office. So after that, we tried to do different projects. Through 2010, there wasn't a lot of construction going on in the city. So we convinced a developer, well, not really a developer, but a guy that owned a lot of land. He had lots that measured 1,000 square meters. And they had been standing empty for like 10 years because these lots that were 1,000 meters were also the most expensive in the city. And there were certain rules in which you basically had to build kind of like palaces. So it's like McMansions being built in Tijuana, where you didn't have a lot of land to develop other type of housing. So we worked with them and we convinced them that they should change the lot sizes from 1,000 square meters to 300 square meters, where we could build more houses, you could have more density, and more people could live there. And he said, okay, go ahead, build a house. And if it works, and if you can pay for it, and if you can sell it, then we'll do the streets. And that's how we started. This is right now the street. So basically we started developing this project in land in which there were no streets, there was nothing. But we took that risk because we knew that eventually it would work out and people would want to live there. So you see, once we're almost finishing the houses, then he said, oh, okay, so it might work, and he started doing the street. There's this day in Mexico in which we celebrate construction workers, which is in May, and they always put up a cross on that day. It's like this tradition. So since this was one of the first houses in that area, people started going nuts that why were they building a church right next to where they were gonna live at? and we had a lot of complaints. Like even the owners were super mad. Like, who authorized you to build this? And we're like, no, it's a house. It will turn out fine. Don't worry. They didn't like it at the end, but we enjoyed it a lot. And that's I like architecture. I like a building that up to a certain point can even be controversial. I mean, I think it's good for people to have something to speak about, to speak their mind about a certain project that they might love or they might hate, but that it's there, that you notice that it's there and that it's interesting in the context that it's placed in. And then once we had certain projects built, we had the idea of that. I mean, what we wanted to happen here was already starting to happen, the conversation between each one of these projects, and in the end, what we really wanted was good quality architecture to be in Tijuana. So we started inviting and collaborating with other architects to bring them to Tijuana to do projects. This was done in collaboration with a Chilean architect, Pablo Casals. And I think our biggest accomplishment in all these houses was that we determined two basic rule sets of what we wanted to happen here. There would be no gates at the street level, and we would have no walls on the back. So if you see that wall is this high, which in a context like Tijuana, in which you had like all of these fortresses built, was huge. I mean, we wanted to start this conversation with people living there and to convince them that that sense of security wasn't accomplished by having huge walls. It was accomplished by talking with your neighbor, by creating a community, which was really in the end the objective. I mean, we're not doing houses, we're doing communities, and they are not planned communities as they're commonly called here. They're just communities that come together and that organically, once people are living there, start establishing these relationships. And this was one of the most recently finished houses. This guy came from Chihuahua, and he wanted us to do a very, very Mexican house, like an hacienda or something like that. And so we basically started designing the house around the idea of the classical Mexican patio in the center, and then just use some Mexican colors. I think he really didn't understand what we were doing until the end when he started living in it, but he really enjoyed it, and that's the point. Like this conversations that you can have with people and trying to basically negotiate between your ideas and their ideas and how you can accomplish interesting things. So we've done 14 houses here, every one of them trying to play with different materials, with different forms, with different configurations. Some of them are great, some not that great, but they're there and people are happy. These houses are in that same neighborhood. I think I took this with my iPhone like 2 or 3 days ago. So everything's kind of like, our practice basically is a work in progress. We see our work in the city as one single project. It's not single projects, it's just one project on a city. And that's constantly evolving and constantly changing and responding to the actual conditions of the city. We just finished this house that was a very kind of like unique site, and we started playing around with ideas of how we should put it together, and the client, I mean, these are clients that are used to brick and like super traditional houses. So just having these conversations of how you can get them to agree when you're at a certain stage with these projects, and just to see how when they're living in these projects, they're reacting to the quality of the space. They're like, oh, so during the construction process, the client was like, so last week I brought my dad to the construction site, and he's like, are you stupid? Why are you building a black house? It's horrible. We're like, I'm gonna take the money away from you so you don't finish this. But we finished it, and he's like super happy in his house, and really living the space. And this is one of the things that I enjoy the most, being able to build in concrete, being able to build with solid materials. And there are no high-end or advanced tools designing this. And especially, like, sometimes we just draw up an idea, and then the guys that are on site, the construction workers, they're the ones that figure out like how they're gonna be able to do that concrete roof. So once we had established a certain body of work, and we had all of these projects were 100% done by us. We would buy the land, design, build, and sell every one of those single projects. So once we kind of like had accomplished what the point of what we wanted to do, we started thinking about maybe it was time to work in a different scale. So we started talking to developers, and basically developers started hiring us, not because we knew how to do architecture, but because we knew how to develop. And we were interested in this city having a certain area or a certain neighborhood which would be walkable, which was not really the case. I mean, Tijuana, you could buy a car with $1,000, so everybody has like 3 or 4 cars. They're just like junk that's brought from the United States. I mean, people sometimes like they have to fix their car and they just leave it and buy another one. It's like it's crazy. So you can imagine the chaos of the city. It's completely spread out. There's no real center. So we're trying to figure out how to change that in this certain area. So we're doing these 3 projects, which are in process, all of them. This is the first one, which is a really bad video, but I just wanted you to see basically the context of where we're working at. It's a very established old neighborhood in Tijuana, and but the unique quality that it has is that it's flat, which the topography of the city is all full of mountains and full of hills. So this was the area that would be amazing, where you could start doing mixed use, where you could walk to a bar, walk to a coffee shop, or whatever. So this is where we started working. This was the first one that was finished. This was finished in like December. It's not even like completely occupied. I think they're gonna start moving in next month. And our conversation with the developer is one conversation. Like, you have to understand what their aim and their objective is, and in the end it's always about the money and the return that they want. But our objective is very different. Like, we want to establish certain precedents of how buildings should be developed in the area, right? So as I was saying, in most projects people want privacy. All of these new buildings that are being done, their marketing is exclusivity, privacy, like this kind of like being isolated from the city. So in our agenda, what we're doing in the project is trying to establish completely the opposite, establish this relationship to the city in which the building is almost kind of like alive. And you're always seeing from the street and from other houses what's happening in these buildings. So what we did is this, for example, this is just one unit, but on this side it's the bedrooms, and on this side is the kitchen. So going from the kitchen to the bedrooms, you're always going through a glass bridge. So from all of the neighborhood, they're just seeing you walk by from one side to the other of your own apartment. So it's kind of like this performative action in which the building is a little bit alive. And if you see that the whole front is glass, so everything that's facing the street is all glass. And then what happens at the back of the building is that all of the circulation is exposed. So you see all of the elevator doors and then the stairs. So whenever you're going from the parking lot to your apartment, people are always seeing you walk by. This is this was under construction, but that's the glass bridge. And then I think that last year that I came, we had recently won this competition to do an 80-unit apartment building. You must imagine, I'm a young architect, we're a small office, so suddenly the jump from the scale of doing, it doesn't matter if it's 10 or 18 houses, to doing an 8-floor building, to then doing a 17-floor building, it's been one crazy adventure and one crazy year, but it's been interesting. And that's, the point is that you always have to take risks, and whatever you think that you won't be able to accomplish through scale, there's always different ways of doing it. This was the site. It was on a hill. This is the project I just showed you. So you can see how close the projects are to each other, and how the context will start changing. So our idea in this project was, again, kind of like, we don't care so much about the interior of the apartment. We know that we can do a beautiful apartment, but that's not the important thing. You're not going to change anything by doing a beautiful apartment. We're trying to really change the concept of how a building is lived, how you circulate through a building. And the idea in this project was that you would always be in relationship to certain exterior areas or to gardens wherever you were through the building. So the whole way of walking through it, you were always in relationship to these gardens. And we managed to do a 2,000 square meter park. And being able to do that in projects in which developers always want to maximize their profit, and it's just a lot about, like, so how much are we going to sell, how many square meters are going to be built. It's all about, like, this negotiation again with them, like trying to convince them that it's definitely worth it. This was the model unit that was built, like the view of the city. And as I was saying, this is the easy part. This is not like, this should be embedded within every project. It's not that we're really interested in doing that. And this is how the construction is going right now. This is from like last week. So this is the first 5 floors, and I think that's like at the 8th floor. So it's basically at half of its size right now, and then this is half of the building. So these are the elevator cores. We'll have the other half over on this side. And that's basically, you can start reading the plan that I was showing you. How circulation goes from the main core through the interior courtyards that are around every unit. And then this is a recent competition. This we did in December, and it was just a very quick exercise, but I wanted to show you a little bit of how, it's very important, and I just read this this thing that Mies van der Rohe would say, and that you should not talk about architecture with your clients. You should talk about their kids, you should talk about their life, but you're the one that has to tell them what architecture is. That's not like part of the conversation. So in every project that we do, we try to speak the language of whoever the project is for. So this development project that had like 2,000 square meter site, we started playing around with parking, started to think what typologies of housing would be needed, who would live there. And then through the basics of, we knew that it had to be 80 units, 40 that were going to be for sale and 40 that were rental. And then started playing around with a little bit of like different configurations of how that space would be, views. But in the end, the only thing that developers care about is this. I mean, not a lot of them care about how the building is going to look, how the building is going to perform. It's just about what the profits are going to be like. So I think that at a certain point, that's things that you have to learn. If you really want to have an impact on how the city is shaped and how the city is built, then you need to start to speak this language. And even if this is not what really interests us, this is the only way that you can get a seat at that table. So basically, going through this, analyzing, for example, through one of the 80 modules, how much each of the components would be. Like we have a cost for like a doorknob, cost for a kitchen, cost for everything. And then analyzing typologies, we have units that were 100 square meters, units that were 120, units that were 80. But basically all of this ends up in this. I mean, he doesn't care about the rendering. This is what he cares about. Like, what's the return of my investment? So this, all of this work, and that we love the building, it's like this super slim concrete structure, really raw, really basic. All of these doesn't matter if those numbers don't add up and they don't make sense to the guy that's putting the money for the building. And in the end, I think as long as their investment is safe, you can play around with whatever you want in architecture. You can try to do interesting projects. You can try to do something different. As long as you show them this, like we're actually doing numbers for projected incomes of rental for units. And it's fine. I mean, it might seem like a waste of time or energy or whatever, but this is what can get you a project. And in that same area, we're developing this project, which is one of our own developments, but I just wanted to show you quickly because these are the same units of that first project I showed you. And I mean, that's what I'm talking about. The project can be completely different, but in the end, the modules, which for us is kind of like almost even democratic because we're doing apartments that might be worth 130,000 and apartments that might be worth 250,000 or $400,000, but they're basically based on the same units and based on the same modules. So basically that's it for development. These are just a couple of other projects that we've done. This is a cultural institution in LA. And this was a great project for us because we got involved at the stage that we were looking for where the cultural institution would be established. So we were very lucky to find a space in kind of like a rougher neighborhood in LA. Now LA, downtown LA, the arts district is completely transforming itself. The best galleries in the world are opening there. Galleries from London, from Berlin. So we wanted the space to be kind of like outside that area for the project to really have a cultural impact in its context. To really think about even like the educational component of what the cultural institution could bring to the neighborhood. And I mean, that's the level that we always get involved in our projects. It's not just about, and this was actually fabricated in Mexico. So it was cheaper for us to fabricate it ourselves in Mexico, ship it, and then put it together in LA than what it would have cost to fabricate it in LA. Then this competition that we did, all of the research that I first showed you about Tijuana and the difference between formal and informal housing, we did this competition in Boston, which is this super, I don't know, very established, all about rules, all about, um, there's not a lot of crazy architecture projects in Boston. But basically, we designed, the idea here was that we would do a concrete structure, a concrete core, and that people could do some self-construction, that people could adapt to whatever they needed through different periods of time. So the idea of the project was a project that in a certain aspect is alive because it's always changing and it's always adapting. And in the end, I think every project that you do has to have a certain component of or a certain range of flexibility, because cities are alive, people are alive, everything's always changing. So buildings have to, at a certain point, react to that and be able to adapt. And the guy that I told you that had to sell his house in Tijuana, this is the house that we're building for him now in Mexico City. So we took certain ideas and certain components of his older house and then just put them together in Mexico City. This is a house that we're doing out in the Hamptons. Still at a very conceptual stage, but we're trying to convince people to do that. And this already started construction. This is a cabin in Tapalpa, which is close to Guadalajara. And what's happening there is that it's kind of like this weekend getaway in which people from Guadalajara are going, spending their weekends. It's on top of a beautiful mountain, and it's like a 2-hour drive. But they started building these mansions and saying like, oh, it's a cabin, and you walk into like a 1,000 square meter home. So we wanted to have a small idea of what a cabin or a weekend like getaway in a mountain could be like. So the whole structure is all wood. You just have some concrete foundations, but the rest is just wood components that hopefully part of it will come from kind of like local trees. There's a big business of lumber in that area. So everything's kind of like completely local. And just to end this, basically, I love this quote, and that's what architecture is for me, because there's no other option. It's not an easy career, but it is an amazing career, and it's a career in which you can actually see the change that you're doing, and you can feel very, very quickly in the process the impact of the work that you're doing. That's it.
You didn't mention the safety. There's no concern, no worries about safety in any of the locations that you show. So people are comfortable with the buildings without having the space for security, for guards, for police.
That's our objective. That's the whole aim, for people to feel safe without the need of the gates, the walls, or whatever. I mean, that's the objective, and that's what we're trying to yeah, it's the whole research, the whole everything that we've learned from every project is applied to the next one. And just for example, the first project we did, there were no walls between the front door of one house and the front door of another one. So just like the neighbors would say good morning, and that kind of like establishes a relationship, and that makes a small change. And that's what I mean, that's what I'm happy about, like being able to have done those changes, and hopefully people, other architects or other developers can keep doing that and pushing those boundaries that in the end can change the whole city.
I think we should invite the Canadian media to learn that this is happening.
I mean, and in the end, it's just me and my team, and like learning and doing, and it's very local, there's a sense of like we're there, we're next to the people that are inhabiting the houses, so the pace of learning the mistakes and learning what has been done well is very quick, and we're very quick to apply it for the next project. Correct mistakes or to do whatever is working.
I was quite interested when you spoke about the informal housing at the beginning of the presentation, and you mentioned your firm did a lot of research on informal settlements. So I was curious, were there certain themes that you identified in your research that were sort of brought into your new interventions? Was it sort of how buildings take on a performative aspect, or was it the removal of walls? So what did you learn from the informal settlements in your research on that?
Just basically how people take ownership of their communities. When people buy a house in these new developments with 500 houses that are all the same, you can see they don't really care if they abandon them. They don't really care in the end how they look, or if maintenance or other things like that. And in this informal settlements, in which houses actually started as cardboard houses, like people would have dirt in the ground and then cardboard, and then they would save up some money, and in 1 year they would put up maybe some wood walls, and then 2 years and 3 years, and in the end you see some of them become like huge structures because larger families live in them, and there's like, not this one, but this one, for example. I mean, I don't know how many square meters that has, but it's at least 300 or 400 square meters. So people take ownership of their communities, and what happens is that since it's all mostly self-construction, neighbors help other neighbors build their own houses. So the process of how these projects are developed through long periods of time really establishes an amazing sense of community. And what ends up happening is that they're really safe neighborhoods because they all know each other. They're kind of like extended families compared to the other projects in which they don't care about what happens. So those are things that we try to apply on our projects too.
So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Alfonso. Our next lecture will be on Wednesday, March 2nd by Susanna Drake, founding partner at the UN Studio. And this is a token of gratitude from our students.
Right. Thanks.